Okay guys, day 2. Today we'll be doing chapter 2 of Node Cookbook. So let's get into it. So basically this chapter will tell us how to handle the input and output. So there are many things that we'll be learning, like the standard input output, the process stdio, right? And the second one will be how to manage the files, right? How to read a file, how to write to a file, update a file and all that. And we'll be inspecting the file metadata, like the size of the file, when the file was modified, when the file was created, like that we can see the stats of the file. Then we can do a little bit interesting thing, that is watching for the file updates, right? So we can start a watcher. Can you say that? Yeah. Okay, so we'll start a js process, right? So it will be constantly watching a file for the change. Okay, so you can basically write anything to the file, save it, and it will console log basically, like the file was updated at this point, right? Then at the end of the video we are gonna create a tcp server and client, right? So basically we'll be creating a tcp server and we'll create a client that will communicate to the server. Pretty interesting. Let's get into it. So as before, you need nodejs 14 and a terminal shell and an editor of your choice. I'll be using VS Code. You can use whatever you like. Anyways, let's get into it. The first one, standard input and output. So stdin is the standard input referred to input stream, okay, and the std out is the output stream, and there's one other stream, std error. It is also a part of the output stream, but it is somewhat different and reserved for outputting errors. Okay, so let's get into it. First, we'll need to create a directory interface with IO, cd into that, and we'll create a file greeting.js. You can do that. I'll just open this up, interfacing with IO. I have already created it and I'll just open it up. Okay, so we have this code right now, but I'm gonna remove that. So basically I'll just cut it. So process data. Okay, so if we run this right now, we can see node greeting.js. So we can see nothing is outputted, but the program hasn't exited yet. Like if we comment that out and run it again, let's close that. So you can see the normal thing, right? So it was actually waiting for something, and it is actually waiting for the input, right? So we can say hello, and obviously it's not doing anything, but it is getting some data, right? So basically how we can get the data, simply like process.stdin.on, and then we can read the data, and we can pass in the callback function which will basically handle the data. So what we can do, we can simply paste that in. So basically what we are doing, we are converting the data which is in the binary format to the string, then trimming it. So basically if there are any spaces, we are just trimming it off and converting to uppercase. So we are then just checking that if the name actually exists. So if it's not empty string, then we will std out.write. So basically this thing is console.log. Okay, you can treat it like console.log. Okay, and this is console.error. You can just think of it like that. So basically if there is name, we'll write to the output field, and if there is no name, we'll just say input was empty. So let's try that out. Okay, and we'll say hello. My bad. And if we just press enter, okay, so input was empty. Okay, then we'll just give Arpan and hello Arpan. Okay, and you can see that even if we give a lot of spaces at the both of ends, it will just trim it off, right? So that's where the string is converted to uppercase. We can see that. So that's what this function is doing. Okay, I hope this was pretty simple, and by that we are done with the first thing. Okay, next thing, managing files with fs module. This is really interesting, so let's get into it. I'll close this one and I'll open managing, working with files. Yeah, okay, Now there are a couple of things that we will see here. So basically the first thing, okay, so we have created a hello.txt inside which it is hello world written, right? So the first file we are going to work with is read write sync. Okay, read write sync, and we'll just create it and just add this code. So what this code is doing, basically we are just requiring the fs module which comes built into node. It's the standard module, so we need not to install anything, it comes with node. So we'll just require fs, okay, inside our code. It's just like importing like in any other languages, right? Then we require path. So path will be just joining the absolute path with the hello text. Okay, so this is the current working directory of our process. So like if we do something like node, and if we say process.cwd, so it will give the current working directory. You can see that here as well, right? So this will give us the absolute path, and then we can just just join with hello.txt, right? So part.join will help us with that. Okay, then we read the file and save it to contents. So basically we are just fs.read file sync, and then provide the file path, the file we need to read, right? And then we pass the format of the file, right? The UTF-8 format. You can read upon it more, but this is the file format, the standard file format you will be using most. Then we are logging to the console the contents of the file, right? And then basically we are just updating the content, right? We are just converting every character to uppercase and saving it to upper contents. Then we are calling another fs function which is write file sync, and if you guessed it, basically write file sync will write to the file, right? Then again we give the file part as the first argument, and upper content, the content we want to write, as the second. And then we are just console logging the file updated, right? And if we run it, let's open the hello text and see, right? So notice when I run read write sync, and when I run it, notice the lowercase hello world just became all uppercase, right? And you can see the previous content was here, right? So this is what the read file sync and write file sync does. But if you notice the function name sync, right? So what is sync? So basically sync means it will run synchronously, right? You saw that we had a console log. Since the file is running from top to bottom, the console log executed after the read file sync has been completed, right? So you can imagine that read file or write file will take some time since it's communicating with an outside file, right? So this is blocking our code, right? That's what the synchronous means. It will be executed from top to bottom in a synchronous manner all at once, right? But let's open up another example which is using async, right? So the first three lines are same. We are importing the fs, then path, and then joining the path, so we get the file path, right? Then we have read file, just read file, no sync, right? Just read file. Then we pass the UTF-8, but we have a function here, and which will be called when read file is done executing, right? When the process has read the file completely, then this function will run, which is known as a callback function, right? So callback function is nothing but the function which is run after the process has completed, right? And then we have update file function. We are just writing the fs file, write file. We are here also we are not using the sync version, we are using the write file, just write file, which is async version. I'll explain that in a minute. But it also takes file path, content, and then a callback function. Like even if there's an error, it will just throw an error. Otherwise it will just console log file update. Now if I tell you something, like if we do console log here, console.log, and I'll say just I will be logged in the end, right? You would think that since it's the last thing, it will be logged at the end. Now let's just try running and check, right? Read write async.js. Okay, so I will be logged in the end was logged at the top. Okay, so why that happened? This is because this is not a synchronous function, right? It just happens after the call stack has finished. So basically Node was built keeping in mind this, right? So Node has the non-blocking architecture, which is the async calls, right? So the async calls wait for the synchronous calls to finish, then they run, right? So read file will wait for all the process that are synchronous to get over, and then it will be executed. And after that, after read file has finished executing, then its callback function will run, and then we update the file. And when that's done, its callback function will run. Okay, I added it in a different function, but what if we had multiple of them? Like I'd say upper content like this will also work, but it is something we call as callback hell, right? So this file has a callback function, then inside that we have a function which has a callback function, and it can go on and on and on. So this is a callback hell, right? And it's really irritating sometimes. So to fix this, promises were introduced, and we'll see promises next. So we have a file here, read write promises, right? Again, we have the first 3 files as the same, but one notice you'll see we have require fs.promises, right? So now it will be requiring the promise things, right? So now the functions are like promises. What are the promises exactly? So promises are like a async call which have 3 states. Okay, so first state is pending, second state is resolved, and third state is rejected. Okay, so when the promise is called, its initial state is pending. Let's say that we are calling this, right? So when we are calling this, obviously right at the moment it can't read the file, right? So till the reading of file is completed, the promise status is pending. When it has completely read the file, there can be 2 things. It has read the file or it hasn't, right? There were some error. So the first thing is called resolved state, okay? And the resolved state is caught by the then block, okay? So when the promise is resolved, then block will run, right? Dot then. And if there were some errors, the catch block will run. So basically the rejected state is handled by dot catch, and the resolved state is handled by dot then. Now inside the cool thing about promises is we can actually handle multiple dot then. We can just simply chain multiple then. Okay, and the return value of this thing, like return 1, and we can simply call node read write promise, and you can see that we get the return from first was the argument to second. So you can see that we can chain multiple then calls, right? So right now we are just reading the file, right? So we can simply add the fs.read file write file to this dot then, and we can catch the error for that here. But if we wanted to do something else, we can pass that in the then dot then. So it's much cleaner than the callback hell, right? It's much more cleaner. But there's one more improvement to that. We have async await as well now. So what this does, this basically completely changes the callback thing, right? So we can go back to the first case. In the sync, we are just storing it in a contents variable, right? Same thing is happening with await. So we just have to add async. By the way, the first thing you need to notice, we have added a function of its own, right? Because top level await are not yet the feature of JavaScript in Node. Actually, we can use that in Dino, but we cannot use that in Node as of now. So we need to add it inside a function of its own, and the function needs to be async function, right? So to tell the process that this is gonna be async, so don't, add it to the call stack, right? So simply await and store it in the contents variable and use it as we do it in the normal way, the sync way, right? But this is an async call. You can see that by the use of await and async keyword. And again, this is a set interval. Basically it runs every 1 millisecond, and you can simply see that when we run async await, you see that this the run or the await doesn't block the running of this. So this in fact is a async call, right? So yeah, that's it for the managing file, inspecting file metadata. Okay, so let's open the fetching metadata and let's see. So I have this empty file.txt, and I have this code. So let's understand the code, right? So we are, like before, we are just importing fs module. Fs basically stands for file system. If I didn't mention that earlier, fs stands for file system. So it has everything you can do with files, right? So it has every function that you can perform through your finder or your explorer, window explorer. You can do that using programmatically. You can do that using fs module. Okay, so we don't need this right now. I'll just keep these two things. Okay, so what's process argv? So when we are running a node process, right? So let's say metadata. Okay, so when let's console log process.argv. Okay, we didn't pass the third argument actually, so let's comment this out and try running it again. Okay, we don't have file. Let's comment this out and let's try running it one more time. Okay, we get an array of 2 elements, right? So the first thing is the path to node binary that we are using, and the second thing is the file path, right? The file we are running. So index 2 or the third element will be the file that we will pass. Okay, so let's uncomment this and let's run by passing file.txt. Okay, so we get stat. So basically this function was executed and we get file stats. So stat sync basically gives us the stats of the file. So basically let's say size. Okay, so since right now we don't have anything, let's add hello. And okay, this is read only. My bad. I actually was trying something. So what I did, I simply changed the file permissions. Okay, so now we can okay, so never mind. So let's add. Okay, and let's try and run it again one more time. Okay, so now let's see the size is 6. I am not sure it's bytes or kilobytes, but it should be bytes only, right? So yeah, we get the stats of it and we get the modified times, right? So when the file was last modified, when the file was last created, we get all that stats using the stat sync. So one thing that you might want to consider in your code, so when you enter wrong, right, so it gives you a long error, right? So whenever you're using this kind of functions that depends on user input, you might want to enclose it in a try catch block. So basically you want to try something out, and if there is any error, it will be catched, it will be caught by this block, and you can just simply error console log something, basically tell the user that you need to do something. Like I gave a file name that did not exist, and it will just give me an error that no such file or directory. What do you want to do? Okay, the last thing I want to uncomment and show you that we can simply change the permissions on the files, right? 664 is basically you might want to read on it. This is basically octal form, right? So if you have used chmod in your terminal, right, so to make a file executable, you pass +x, right? So that's that if you have knowledge of, you can do that using this chmod, right? So let's say if I pass 555, 555, then I will lose the write access to this file, right? So basically, even if I give like hello again and try to save it, files is not there, file is there. So now if I try to, let's delete it and try to save it, it will give me fail to save, file is read only. Select overwrite to attempt to make it writable. I can overwrite it and I'll be, getting the permissions back. But basically you just want to give 664 right now, and I'll just run it again, and yeah, I have the permissions again and I can save it, right? That also you can do with fs module, and which is pretty cool. Okay, these are the different properties that stat gives us, right? So we basically saw size and m time, c time, the last modified time, the last status change time, status change. Okay, so the birth time was file creation time. Okay, cool. So that all we can get. So we can check the access that we do have access or not. If you simply wanted to check the existence, you could use access, right? Then there's also exists, fs.exists, but it is deprecated and it is encouraged to use access. Then we can inspect symbolic links. Like we can create symbolic links, right? So we can simply pass this thing. Now you see that we do have a link to file, right? The symbolic link to file. Okay, and it has the same thing, right? So it is the symbolic link, right? So now we can simply just, let's go to the node and we can see the stats of that using lstat sync. Okay, so the normal file, the stat for normal file was stat sync, and for the symbolic links we can use, and we can give link to file, and it will give the same thing, size 8. Okay, and notice that we didn't need to import fs inside node repl. That's because all the standard modules are already imported inside node, so we did not need to require fs inside this watching files for update. So again, we need to create a new directory. We'll just go to file, code, file, watching, and we'll open it up, and I'll close this one. And yeah, so I have a file, hello world, right? And I have a watch file. Okay, so this one is async, I guess. Yeah, right. So this will be constantly watching, and this will get we need to pass the file, right? And then we need to give a callback function. Okay, so this is async since it is getting a callback function. So basically it will get current and previous stats. Okay, it will not get the content, it will get stats, right? So we can just simply print current m time we saw the last modified time, right? So we can simply pass the file. So the file was this, right? This thing, we are just adding the path. We are not using absolute path, we are just using the /1. Okay, and we are just passing the file path. Then we'll be console logging the file name, then updated or modified time, right? So let's see, and it will keep running, right? So it is just watching. So when we, let's say hello again and save it, yeah, it updated. So it took some time. Okay, I guess it takes, the default wait time is 600, I guess 600 milliseconds or something. But yeah, it will update every time, console log every time we make a change and save, right? So that's pretty cool. So that's how we watch the file changes. The simply fs.watch file, then pass the file, and then callback function, and you'll get the current and previous stat. We saw what stats, we get modified time, we get the last status change time, we get the size and everything, and we can simply put updated size as well. Now the size is current dot size. Let's use the previous also. So change in size, change in size, we'll just subtract current size from previous that size. Okay, so let's see, I'll just close this process and whoops, run it again, and let's see, I'll just simply add, okay, there's nothing. Okay, I'll just simply remove that. Okay, so the change in size was -1 since we removed a character, so obviously the size decreased, right? So let's add something. Hello. Okay, so we added something and the change in size was 22. So if we hover over it, we can simply say see that watch file has the param file name and then a file protocol. Okay, a file name and a callback listener, right? So, and this will give the fs.stats current, and the previous will be fs.stats only, and fs.path like file name, right? So you can just in VS Code you can just hover over and see the function, right? So what's it returning, what it takes as the parameter, it's pretty useful. Now for the most fun part, we'll be creating a TCP server and client communicating. The socket basically allow machine and devices to communicate. Socket is also used to coordinate IO across networks, right? So the term socket is used to refer one endpoint or a two-way network, right? So basically the means for communication. And socket enable us to build real-time web applications such as instant messaging application, but here we'll be using TCP server, right? So TCP basically stands for transmission control protocol, and we'll be creating this, and let's see. So first we'll be creating a server, then a client, right? So we'll be requiring the net. Okay, so net is also a nodejs standard library. Okay, we'll be needing that, and we'll be creating a server for that, right? And it will take a function which will give us a socket as an argument, right? And then whenever a client is connected to this server, it will run this function, right? We'll just see. And after that, we'll just say listen and give the port and host name. So here the host name is localhost and the port is 3000. On the client side as well, we will need to require the net. Then we'll just create a socket like and pass the net.connect and pass the port name and host name. Mind here, the host name and port name should be same as the server, right? So the client is simply just connecting it. So server has been started on the port. Okay, so let's see. So let's start the server.js. Okay, so it does nothing till the client connects, right? So this function will be executed when the client is connecting. So basically then we are just socket.write. So basically we are sending world to the server, okay, which is then this function will run then. So socket on data. So when there is some data, the stream of data, right? We just saw that in process.stdin, right? So just connect, right? Okay, so when there's data, we'll just simply call this callback function, and we are just naming that data to name and hello world, right? So we can do anything with that, right? So basically socket.write on the client side will send the data to server, and socket.write on the server side will send the data back to the client, right? And then we are simply just listening to data here again, socket.on, and we are just listening on data. We are just naming it as data only in the callback function, and we are just console logging to the string. Again, data will be in buffer output or binary, and we are just simply to console log, we are just converting it to string. Okay, awesome. Our server is started. We'll just simply create a split the screen, and we'll connect a client as well. So node client.js. Awesome. So the moment I ran client.js, client was connected, client sent the client sent world to that, right? And this started running, and then server sent back hello and with that name, right? So we can do something interesting here. Let's say console.log, and we'll say enter your name, or we'll just say who are you. Okay, and then we can simply say we'll read process.stdin.on, we'll say data, and then we can simply say pass a function, and we'll just say data here, or input. Okay, and we'll simply pass socket.write, and let's add this inside only. So yeah, so we'll just simply pass input dot toString. So let's close the client and let's run it again. So this time it didn't give us anything. It's just waiting for our input. So we'll just say Arpan. Hello Arpan. Pretty cool. Hello. Okay, so we need to trim this off. So yeah, let's try again. Arpan and hello Arpan. Awesome. So we needed to trim the \n, so that's why the server was sending exclamation mark, and it was coming to the new line. Pretty amazing. Every time we connect, we will get client connected and we can talk to this server. So you can actually create a complete app throughout it. Like you can start communicating with your server and client, and this is pretty amazing. And I don't know if you can imagine it, but this is pretty powerful. We just created a client server communication just without using any library, just Node, which is really powerful. Okay, with that we come to an end of this amazing chapter. Okay, you can also create a UDP server. There we use dgram, but I would suggest you Google that and find that out. UDP is typically for video calling and gaming because it's more fast, but the UDP might not be efficient when you're trying to send something important, right? Because there can be some loss. Like UDP does not guarantee delivery of packets, right? There can be some loss of data, so you need to see your usage, right? If there's speed, you use UDP. If there's reliability, use TCP. But yeah, that's it for this one, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Streams.